Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Colt from the future once again, just talking about the alternate syntax, the class properties proposal, and how it applies to instance methods and to method binding. So this is another thing that's come up. In addition to the alternate syntax for defining state that we've seen, if you watched the video a couple videos ago that I added in to talk about the alternate syntax, there's an alternate syntax for defining methods and binding them where we don't have to explicitly bind. So I do talk about this in depth in the events section of the course, but once again, I just want to get in front of any controversy here. That's the wrong word, but in front of any confusion, because a lot of students have seen other tutorials where they just show this alternate syntax, class properties, to define your methods. So let me just show you how it applies here. We have this broken click component, which is not actually broken anymore. We have a piece of state called clicked, or well, it's an object, but in that object we have clicked set to false, and we have an on click on a button that calls this.handleClick, and that sets state to have clicked be true, which then causes a re-render, and we get a different result down here in our H1. So we've already seen that we can use this alternate syntax to eliminate having a constructor. We don't need this. We can just define our state like this. Right here, I'll comment out the bind, and that will define our state. That works. If you didn't watch the video a couple videos ago on the alternate syntax, then definitely watch that. This is another option. But then you might be wondering, what about binding? I need a constructor to bind. So you could add a constructor and do it in there. But the other option is to use the same class properties, the Babel class properties proposal, which once again is not, in fact, real JavaScript at this point. It still is very nice, and I'm a bit of a broken record here. I do use this on my own. I enjoy it. Enjoy it is the wrong word, but it's short, it's clean, but I don't like teaching it as the first way of writing React components. So what we do is we say handleClick equals a function like this. So handleClick equals, and then our arrow function, and then everything else stays the same. Now what this will do is define our method handleClick, and it will bind it automatically to the instance of this component. Just like we did explicitly, it does it automatically. And you might have noticed I just lost those parens when I saved. My VS Code they're unnecessary, so it gets rid of them, but that doesn't really matter. If you don't have any arguments, it would look like this right there. Okay, so just to show you that it does work, let's call this broken click 2, go to my app.js, import it, broken click 2, and then render a single one, broken click 2. And not clicked, and I click, it goes to clicked. So we still have to make sure we're referencing this.state.clicked, this.handleClick. We just don't have to have a constructor. But if I take this and I come over to the Babel little try it out now demo, make sure you have React, and I believe it's either stage 2 or 3 where class properties, where the proposal was included. You can see that there is a constructor. I didn't type this, but it made a constructor. It calls super, and it defines 2 properties. I won't go into much detail here, but if you watch the earlier video on the alternate state syntax, I talk about what this does. But it's basically initializing state on each instance of our broken click 2, and then it's doing the same thing for handleClick. It's creating a property on the instance of the component. Basically, it's the same thing as binding it. So it's a shortcut, it's nice and easy. So you'll see this all the time in other tutorials. Just remember, it is not valid code at this point without Babel. I do talk about it later in the course. I use it in some of the later projects. I like to include both later on, just to make you a well-rounded React developer. But without going over too much of the same stuff I already talked about in the previous video, I just want to reiterate that I'm not teaching this as the primary way. I'm not using it in most of the early projects because I think it leads in certain students to bad habits or to misunderstandings. Some students who aren't super familiar with JavaScript in the first place might assume that this is just regular valid JavaScript syntax. It's also a lot clearer here what we are doing. We have to manually bind And that reinforces the idea that we have to associate this method with the instance of the component. It's clear conceptually what we're doing, the reasoning behind it. Compared to this, which is a lot simpler and shorter, it's just magical to a lot of students, and it doesn't force you to confront the reality of what we're doing and why we have to bind and what the issue is. So again, totally up to you. I will mix it up later in the course, but for most of the course early on, I will be using a constructor. I will be calling super. This.state is how I initialize state. I bind manually. You don't have to do that. It's up to you, but I just wanted to explain myself. Of course, I still welcome questions and opinions in the Q&A, but I just wanted to get out there and just give you my thoughts on the whole thing. All right, so 2 versions of the exact same thing, one short and magical, one longer but more explicit, less magical. Okay,